Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, worshippers of all ages, welcome to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today we're taking a first look at Tier 10 American submarine. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to World of Warships. This is USS Balao. Now, for those of you that aren't necessarily familiar with American submarine development throughout the Second World War, Balao was essentially the most advanced submarine that the Americans commissioned during the course of the war. But the Balao that you're seeing here in port, you can look at her sail and the way the deck is structured, the complete and total lack of a deck gun. This is obviously, this version of Balao in World of Warships, to me, very clearly, is meant to represent maybe a late war, early Cold War kind of modification to the diesel subs. Because remember, the first nuclear submarine, USS Nautilus, didn't come into service until the mid-1950s, I believe 1956 or 57. So there was a 10-year period after the end of the Second World War where diesel boats continued to be, the submarines that everybody ran, and based on, of course, some of the captured German technology and the advancements and the learning made throughout the course of the war, submarine technology continued to advance. You see here, for example, the fully enclosed mast, right? All of the various radar antenna, the submarine, the periscope, all of that enclosed now in a hard shell. For most Second World War boats, that was not a thing. Okay, the kind of different shaped conning tower, gone is the kind of stern-mounted 50 caliber gun, and the deck gun completely gone. I believe these back here are meant, I think this is where the deck gun would have mounted. I don't really remember if the deck gun was forward or aft on the Balaos, but either way, deck gun is gone. So too gone are the handrails that you used to see, right? Submarines used to spend all this time on the surface. They didn't after the war. That became a bigger problem, less and less so. Anyways, Balao. Let's have a look around. We're on the test server here. It's Saturday, the 12th of June as we record this, 12th of June, 2021. First look at our Tier 10 submarines, and we're just kind of peeking around to see what we got. So, survivability. Now, in the U-2501 video, I erroneously claimed that U-2501 and Balao had the same HP, and that's because they transposed two numbers. U-2501's HP is 13,400. Balao's here, 14,300. So I apologize, a little dyslexia there. Balao does have more HP than her German counterpart, which again, as we mentioned in the other video, is more reflective of the fact that the American fleet boats tended to they displaced more. They were bigger, they were designed for longer range operations in the Pacific. Real briefly, we'll look over the armor scheme. Remember, guys, you don't care about the armor on a submarine. It's not going to help you. It's not going to save you. It's not going to it's really much not going to make any impact. Your armor is your stealth. Your armor is the water. You wear the armor of a submarine. You wear the armor of the ocean as your armor. A submarine wears the water as its armor. There we go. I'll get it out in a minute. My God, it's early. Oh, man. Sorry about that, guys. All right. Concealment. Now, we looked at U-2501. She was 5.6 on the surface. You see here, Balao is 5.8. So if I go and I plug camo onto her, probably the best I can get is down to 5.7, I'm guessing. Yep, 5.7. There it is. So remember, we pointed this out in the U-2501 video. You cannot mount a concealment modification. There is no concealment expert in the submarine commander skill tree. This is as low as you can go. So submarine detection on the surface is fairly stable, right? It's basically whatever you see, you might cleave off 1/10 of a kilometer, and that's what it is. Now, something to consider, there are Tier 10 destroyers that outspot Balao here, right? Shimakaze outspots this ship. Now, it's not by much. So does Legendary Gearing. Again, not by much, but it does outspot them. So that's noteworthy to me. I would have expected this to be a little lower, but I think what Wargaming has decided is that, from the purpose of game balance, submarines and destroyers essentially have roughly comparable detection radii in the various tiers. I will say the mid-tier submarines tend to outspot most mid-tier destroyers, but here at Tier 10, that gap is much, much narrower. The reason for that, I think, is that submarines, a submarine sitting at periscope depth basically is perma-spotting the destroyer and cannot be attacked other than depth charges. The destroyer basically has to just charge him and try and drop some depth charges and hope for the best. But the difference there is the sub can still fire his torpedoes at the oncoming destroyer, the famous down-the-throat shot. And also, while that destroyer is spotted, I'm sure, I would hope, all the submarine's teammates are firing at it, right? So it becomes a bit of a game of cat and mouse there. But anyway, roughly comparable to surface detection of a Tier 10 destroyer. Now, 2.6 by air. We pointed this out in the German video. This is significantly higher than the Germans, and this I think will actually give an enemy carrier an opportunity to catch you flat-footed on the surface and get a rocket strike off if he can spot you, if he can stumble across you. It's going to depend on the carrier, right? The faster the planes, the harder that is to pull off. But the slower the planes, I'm looking at you, Audacious, the more likely this is to occur. Maneuverability, we kind of got this late in the German video. Let's look at it here. 32 knots max speed on the surface. Yikes. Yikes, this is very ahistorical. Most of these ships could push maybe the mid 20 knots on the surface. This is we're getting into some arcade fantasy here, guys. This is a nod to trying to balance the ships and make them useful in game. So 32 knots on the surface, 440 turning circle, 7.2 rudder shift time. Balao handles much better than 2501 does. The German top-tiered submarine, I keep wanting to say destroyer, submarine, does not handle this well. Balao's turning circle, much better. Rudder shift, much better. Speed, a little better. Submerged, 25.6 knots, incredibly ahistorical, of course. And you see there her diving plane shift time and maximum dive and ascent time. So the Germans submerge, they are a little slower submerged. I think 2501 was like 23 knots submerged. Here we see Balao has an even higher top speed. Again, we're talking about a tier 10 submarine that can keep up with some of the tier 10 battleships in the game. Again, I'm looking at you, Vermont. But this is also not significantly slower than, say, a Yamato. Now, you're not going to gain on a Yamato, right? But you might be able to keep pace with him for a while, depending on his maneuvers. That's noteworthy. Diving plane shift time. I'm not sure this translates one-to-one. This is mostly a representation of how long it takes the ship to submerge from the surface. And the Americans do this slower than the Germans. And they also don't get access to that goofy crash dive consumable that the Germans do. So American submarines in general, more vulnerable on the surface to aircraft than their German counterparts. Battery duration. We talked about this over in the U2501 video. This does not translate directly to, at least not that I've been able to find, to time submerged, right? You would think that maybe there's a nice correlation here that, 468 means I have 468 seconds of submerged time. As near as I can figure, that's not the case. But this does represent, it's a graphical representation of how much battery charge that the boat has. This is less than the Germans. The Germans tend to seem to have, be able to stay down longer than the Americans right now. That just seems to be the way, one of the balancing mechanics between the two nations. Sonar and torpedoes. Now, one of the things we pointed out over in the German tree, the German sonar reloads very quickly and does not hang out quite as long as the American sonar, and you see that here. The reload time on American sonar, 10 seconds versus, I think it was like 8.4 for U2501. The ping stick time, 25 seconds for the Germans. You see here, 30 seconds for the Americans. American torpedo range, also longer, 14.2 kilometers and 70 knots. The Americans also bringing more torpedoes to the fight. 6 bow tubes, which it's not going to show me. It's going to show me the stern tubes. That feels like an odd choice. And 4 stern tubes. Now, we talked about that in the other video. That is a typical armament of a submarine, an American fleet boat from this era. Remember, the American fleet boats were designed for much longer range operations than the U-boats were. U-boats designed for Atlantic. Typical American submarine had to travel 1,500, 2,000 miles just to get into a patrol area where it might encounter enemy shipping. The U-boats did not have to go nearly as far to find targets. So the American ships tended to have more torpedoes, heavier torpedo loads, again, longer cruising ranges designed for longer range operations. 70-knot torpedo speed, 23-second reload time. This is huge. The German reload time is 85 seconds. The Americans are literally almost a quarter of that. A quarter of that. What? There's some weird stuff going on here in the torpedo reloads. Like, I almost feel like, we are on a test server, I almost feel like Wargaming is intentionally derping around and borking up these numbers just to see what happens. Because I can think of no valid reason why the American submarine should be able to just spam torpedoes while the Germans are just stuck waiting a minute and change to reload their tubes. Fewer tubes even. The German boat only has 6 bow tubes. It has no stern tubes. Balao here, of course, has the option to turn and show her stern to the enemy and get more efficient in the water. Look at consumables real quick. We talked about, of course, she's a ship in World of Warships. She gets damage control party. We talked about kind of how we believe hydrophone should work in the other video. I'll see if I can capture some video of that today, kind of demonstrating how that works. And then the American national flavor consumable here in the submarine branch is reserve battery. The Germans get crash dive. Here in the US, we get reserve battery. What does that do? You push this button, and for 30 seconds, your dive capacity doesn't change. While you're submerged in a submarine right now, you have a battery charge that is fixed at the start of a match. You cannot recharge the batteries. Your battery charge is just, it is what it is when the match starts. And then over the course of the match, anytime you spend submerged, reduces that number. You can change how quickly it reduces that number, which potentially gives you more battery reserve to play with. The Americans here have the ability to essentially get 2 free 30-second boosts to their submerged time, which is really nice. But the difference is, as near as I can figure, you need to be using these kind of early in a match, because once your battery reserve is completely depleted, I don't think this consumable will do anything. I'd have to test it. That's my suspicion. You can't push this button and magically make stuff happen, because you don't, 30 extra seconds of zero probably still equates to zero, because I think you still have to have some reserve capacity to go ahead and dive. I could be wrong. I'd have to test it, but that's my suspicion. Anyway, guys, there's our first look at Balao. She's a really, first of all, again, the art department continuing to crush it. She is beautiful. The Balao you're seeing here is kind of a late war, early Cold War look at what the hull would have configured like. This is not what the Balaos looked like when they were first started launching in the mid-1943, kind of mid-war. This is obviously a late war conversion, but she is gorgeous here. And yeah, we'll have to go try these out and get a little playtime and see if I can show you what gameplay looks like. In the meantime, guys, wash your hands, be safe, and I'll catch you next time.